Hey, kiddos, welcome back. Here we go into chapter 13. Chapter 13 covers social psychology and it covers basically how we react to our environment as a whole. So, and part of the chapter, I'll also have, in addition to this video, there'll be 3 other videos about social psychology experiments that are 40, 50, 60 years old, depending. But they'll have the years on them. But they're just different social experiments that were done really before the ethics of social or experimental psychology was really there. These experiments actually helped to solidify the ethics, excuse me, around, different psychological experiments. So, this is why we have the rules. This is part of the reason we have the rules that we have. So here, we'll go ahead and start sharing with chapter 13, which is social psychology. So the definition of social psychology in and of itself is how people think, influence, and relate to other people. And we'll go into these actual definitions and examples of these 3 points in just a minute. The first is social cognitions, the second is social influences, and the third is social relations. Now, an example of social psychology research is what we call the bystander effect. Basically, the bystander effect from 1968 says individuals are less likely to help in an emergency when others are present because of what we call the diffusion of responsibility. What that means is if you're in a group and something happens, then you're going to look around in that group and go, oh, well, there's 40, 50, 60 other people here. I don't need to call the cops because there are 40, 50, 60 other people around here that will. But the problem with that is that 30, 40, 50, 60 other people are thinking exactly the same way you are. And therefore, really, the likelihood of anybody calling actually diminishes the larger group you have. This is also true with if you've ever done fundraising for any group. Statistically speaking, if you have a large group, you're actually going to wind up getting fewer dollars per person within a large group because, again, that group think or the diffusion of responsibility. People are looking around going, oh, you don't need my money because you've got everybody else's. So when you're fundraising, if you have the opportunity to ever fundraise for an organization, you want to keep in mind that you want a greater number of smaller events because what's going to happen is per person, you're going to wind up getting more dollars per person because everybody's going to look around and go, wow, there's only 20, 30 people here. My dollars actually count. So keep that in mind when you're doing anything as far as, responsibility goes of a group. The more you have, the more people you have in a group, the less individual responsibility people are going to take. So I promised you the definitions of social cognition and others. So the question here is, as far as social cognition goes, how do people select, interpret, remember, and use social information? Okay, first and foremost is person perception. Like it or not, we judge people first on physical attractiveness. If you find someone physically attractive, okay, you're gonna be more apt to remember that person because it has made a connection with you on a psychological level. Now, with that, okay, if you find or when you see somebody that you find physically attractive, what you're going to then interpret or perceive is that physical attractiveness means beauty is a good stereotype. Now, the self-fulfilling prophecy here is if you say beauty is good, then what's going to happen is you're going to wind up making sure that that happens. It's kind of like the negative self-fulfilling prophecy. If you continue to tell yourself you're going to fail at something, you're going to fail at something, you're going to fail at something, sadly, more times than not, you will fail because you've already decided that you are going to fail. So you will fail. Same goes here for the self-fulfilling prophecy of the physical attractiveness, beauty is good stereotype. You're going to wind up finding people that are pretty, and then you're going to start to really accentuate what's good about them. And it's not good, it's not bad, it's just simply the way the brain works. Um, and again, when we talk about beauty or attractiveness, um, the brain tends to see beauty as something of youthfulness, symmetry, because basically, in a composite of faces, okay? So basically, if you've got a group of faces or a composite or a creation, um, you're going to find, you know, as symmetry, meaning each side of the face is relatively a mirror image. Now, I mean, technically it's not exact, because one eyebrow is going to be higher than the other. One eye may be shaped a little differently than the other. One side of the nose may look different than the other. One cheekbone may be different than the other. One dimple on one side versus no dimple on the other. But but as a whole, what we're seeing is that the more youthful, the more symmetric the faces are, the more apt we are to pay attention to and find attractive. Now, we all love that first impression. First impressions can never, ever, ever be changed. It is what it is, first impression, because I mean, in that, do your impressions of that person change over time? Yes, they do. So that first impression that you have, that first impression you had of me that first day you walked into the classroom, or if you looked over the syllabus, and you either saw my name or you saw the picture that I have, that was your first impression of me. That was your first introduction to me. So that first introduction that you have to a person, even if it's not visual, okay, being like seeing that person, but seeing something that they did, that then creates that first impression. Now, can those impressions change over time? Yeah. I mean, my mother-in-law, she liked me in the beginning, not so much as time went on, right? And so her impression of me has changed, but that first impression of me that she had was somebody very, very timid and very quiet. Now, again, this was almost 30 years ago, so a lot's changed in the last 30 years, give or take. We don't necessarily mean to do it, but we see ourselves as a social object, and we are. I mean, we're a social person, but object meaning, a part of, not necessarily a thing, but a part of. So the first thing is as far as our objectivity goes, okay, I guess, or the objectiveness is self-esteem. We all have positive and negative thoughts about ourselves. However, sometimes the views of ourselves are not necessarily rooted in reality. Positive illusions, I'm even going to go so far as to say negative illusions. Those that have a solid self-esteem, a really good self-esteem, do tend to see themselves a little more positively than those that don't have a very high self-esteem. If they have a sense of, a high sense of self, then they're going to be important. They're going to be, they may not necessarily mean to, but they're going to be show-offs. If they're good at something, they're going to kind of show that off in certain ways. If Beauty and the Beast, love it, Gaston, right? He was perfect example of the perfect specimen, right? So he's sitting there telling, he's telling you how manly he is, and it doesn't, he gets any opportunity he gets to show off his muscles or his beautiful features, he does that. Now, that's what he thinks of himself, not necessarily what the world at large sees him as. Um, the self-serving bias is a tendency to take credit for success and denying responsibility for failure. Um, and again, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just simply the way the self works. Um, we all want, if we are part of something that turns out to be a success, then yes, we want to be a part of it because we want our name to be associated with that. If it's a failure, then we really don't want to. I played a minimal role in it, or I told them not to do it and they did it anyway. But again, the higher the esteem, the more apt the more apt the person is to skew well over towards the credit for success and well over towards the failure of responsibility for any failure. And then the last is a self-objectification. Basically, it's the tendency to see oneself as primary object in the eyes of others, meaning the world revolves around me. Little kids will do this because they don't have the maturity to see outside of themselves. Now, it's not that they have a self-esteem issue. It's just that they're not quite old enough to grasp that reality goes well beyond, their lives. This is talking about an adult. An adult who has high self-esteem is going to see themselves as more of a primary player in anything that's going on. Now, it's not always a bad thing, and it's not always a good thing. We always want to have a high self-esteem, because what happens is that high self-esteem actually helps us to be healthier. If we tend to have a low self-esteem, then we're going to think less of ourselves. We're going to think that we don't deserve help, or we don't deserve accolades, or we don't deserve anything but the negative parts. Now, so it's a good balance of, we have to have a good balance of both, because we need those successes so that we feel like we're contributing to society. But on the flip side, we also need a little bit of failure so that we can remember, wait a minute, we are fallible people. We do make mistakes. A mistake is not, or a success is not, or a failure is not the mistake. A failure is the inability to get up and continue on despite the fact that we've made a mistake. The success is not always doing something correctly. Sometimes success is merely accepting, okay, I failed. It's okay. I'm going to get up. I'm going to do it again. Okay. If you guys if there was one exam, or if there was one chapter of homework that you didn't do well on, the success is going, all right, this is one grade. It's one of many. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to do better the next time. And if I need it, I'm going to ask for extra credit, because what's the worst you can say? No. Right? So again, self-esteem, we all need at least a little bit of it. Social behavior says that we behave in social ways towards people around us. We can't help it. We are social creatures. Human beings are social creatures. Okay? We are going to act around people just because people exist. Okay? You're going to behave social ways. You're going to react. You're going to act simply because we exist with other people. Now, the two extremes of this human social activity, okay, the first one is altruism, and the second one is aggression. Now, the definition of altruism is an unselfish interest in helping someone else. Helping someone simply because you have the opportunity to, simply because you can, not because you're going to get something out of it. So this falls in line with, the opposite of this would be egoism, helping others for personal enhancement. you know, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, what we call, you know, what you're hear a lot in legal um, proceedings, you know, quid pro quo, you do for me, I do for you. Or if you want me to do for you, then understand that at some point, I'm going to come back and ask you for a favor. Okay. We got into this discussion last night over dinner and how this is kind of, I don't think our forefathers had intended politics to go this way, but it's kind of the way it's gone. You know, who has the bigger pot of money, who has the bigger societal pull, who has the bigger political pool is going to get what they want, because that's just the way the world works. Do I agree with it? Doesn't matter. Do I disagree with it? Again, it doesn't matter. The fact is, you know, as individuals, hopefully we do make that unselfish act of helping somebody simply because we can. But the reality is sometimes we're going to do for others to ensure that we get something else in return. Okay, so here, the two experiments that or the three experiments that I'm going to add to the Canvas, or you know, the add to Canvas are going to be Ash's experiment, Milgram's experiments, and Zimbardo-Stanford prison experiment. These are going to be really good. Hang on, sorry guys. Sorry, trying to do something real quick. Oh, wait, here we go. All right, hang tight. I will be back in just a minute. All right, well, never mind then. Okay, never mind. Here we go. We'll go ahead and finish up. All right, so sorry about that. Anyway, so these three things, or these three experiments are, I'll put there are YouTube videos on these three experiments, and they're actually pretty impressive, not from a, ooh, that's amazing, impressive from, wow, you know, it kind of makes it makes a statement as to what, you know, what was going on in their minds anyway. So when we talk about social identity, here's just some categories that we can put ourselves in. We identify ourselves by ethnicity or religion. Some examples here are Jewish, Asian American, Southern Baptist, West Indian. Relationships, are we a parent? Are we a mother, a son, a widow? Vocations and avocations. Are we an artist, an athlete, a psychologist, a military veterans? Okay. Political affiliation, environmentalist, feminist, Republican, Democrat. Again, these are just a few of the areas, and then, you know, they expand well beyond what's here. And then of course we've got the stigmatized identities, which, you know, are you an overweight person? Do you have AIDS? Are you a homeless person? Are you an alcoholic? Are you an addict of some sort? Right. So as a society, we identify individually as a part of these groups, either one group, two groups. I mean, we all fall in different groups or multitude of groups. Okay. So, but sometimes what happens is this sense of, or this thing called prejudice. And a prejudice is an unjustified negative attitude toward a group and its members. So you say, well, I don't like a group of people, okay? And so I don't like this group, but I also don't like the people in the group. So you've got the big, you know, I don't like vegetables, which means I don't like green beans, I don't like peas, I don't like carrots, I don't like corn, right? So that negative attitude towards a group, and then the individual members in the group. Now, in that prejudice, you know, the book right here is going to talk about it, implicit versus or explicit versus implicit. Now here in implicit, it says racism But the definitions of explicit versus implicit, and it can go well beyond racism, but explicit means it's there's no confusion that you're being prejudiced. Explicit here, if you want to say racism, you see the two people down at the bottom right hand part of the screen. Explicit is leaves no room for doubt. I don't like you or your kind. Okay. Meaning in your kind, it could mean, she's female, she's not Caucasian. So he doesn't like her and he doesn't like non-Caucasians. On the flip side, the implicit racism is you kind of feel it and you kind of sense it, but you don't really, there's nothing concrete. It's like saying something without necessarily saying something. It's implied, okay? But it's not really concrete. It's not, you can say, oh, well, you did or you didn't. Well, I didn't say anything. How you interpreted what I did is up to you, right? It's the sadly the little old white lady walking down the street when a black young man is walking toward her, and she, instinctively grabs her purse and holds it to her. She may not necessarily think that that kid in and of himself is going to try to rob her, but because of television she's seen, news that she's heard, or attitudes from other people that she associates with, or have told her, look, if you see a black kid, this is what's going to happen. So you need to do what you need to take care of yourself. Okay. Again, I'm not agreeing with any of it. I'm just simply letting you know these things exist. And sometimes we do them even when we don't mean to. Okay. So some explanations of why we're prejudiced, and this goes beyond, it's not just race. It's not just gender. It's not just one thing or another. It's in and throughout everything. And the only thing we can do is accept that it's there and then try to deal with it the best we can. And some reasons why we are prejudiced against one group or another is because there is a competition, and it's always about who's better at something. Cultural learning, we're taught sometimes to dislike a certain group of people. Something we need to sometimes motivate, sometimes we have to put other people down so that we can feel better. Don't agree with it, but sometimes that's the way it works and the way it happens. And sometimes we just have a limited cognitive process in that we just, we don't necessarily understand why something is the way it is. It's just, that's what we've been taught over time and through repetition. Now, there's a difference between stereotype and prejudice. A stereotype is a generalization about a group, okay? Every now and then, if we talk about sports in class, I'll say, look, I'm a short white chick. I don't do basketball, right? Because stereotypically, who do you see as the really good basketball players? Okay. Sad to say, we just lost Kobe Bryant, but he was, in my opinion, the epitome or the best example of a basketball player. He was tall, he was black, and he was a male. And I'm sorry, with the exception of Larry Bird and a couple of others, when we think of great basketball players, I'm sorry, I'm thinking tall black guys, because that's what I see as successful basketball players. Now, it's not meaning that I'm saying that short white men can't play basketball or short black men can't play basketball. And there's some very good female basketball players out there as well. But the stereotype that I have developed is based on what I see. I grew up admiring the Harlem Globetrotters. It was a group of amazingly talented, tall black men. And therefore, because of that, I have continued with that stereotype. So, but the flip side of that is discrimination, which is an unjustified, negative, and harmful action. So I don't, if I were to go up and treat somebody, harshly just because of who they are or what they do, simply because of, now that's discrimination. And it can be against an individual, it can be against a group, it can be against, just certain people in general. There's no specific group or specific ideation of discrimination. It simply is an unjustified, negative, or harmful action against a person or a group of people. With that being said, how can relations between ethnic groups be improved? This is a question for you to think about. I've got my own ideas, and they're individualistic ideas, because if I'm dealing with different ethnic groups, how I'm going to come across, or how I'm going to interact with those groups, and depending on the history. All right, so if I'm trying to mend relationships between two ethnic groups, I'm not going to react to my Puerto Rican friends the same way I would interact necessarily with, some of the Black people in my neighborhood. Why? Because the history between the white people and the Puerto Ricans versus the history between the white people and the Black people are different. So as far as being able to mend relationships or improve relationships between different ethnic groups is really going to be on a person-to-person basis, I think. I don't think we can generalize and say, okay, as a group of white people, we're going to treat a group of Black people this way. I don't think it works. I think we're going to improve relationships on a person-by-person basis, through, I think, authenticity. But again, my personal opinion. Right. So we're going to end here with health and wellness, especially important during this time right now where we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're all quarantined, and there's different levels of quarantine depending on where in the United States we are. Some of us still have the opportunity to get into our cars and drive somewhere else. But others don't. Others are, look, if you're not going to the grocery store or doctor's appointment, you don't need to be on the road. So what this has taught us, though, is there's an increase. If there's an increase in isolation, there tends to be an increase in mortality, because we are social beings. And if we don't have that, it's like, going without food or going without water. We need that socialization to keep us going, because we need that social support for our coping skills. That's why right now Facebook has gone crazy with funny things. The memes on there are insanely funny. There's groups out there, if you were locked in, I just got one the other day that says, if you were locked in Disney World, answer these 20 questions with @ and then write the first letter of the sentence. So, a friend of mine, Susan, it says, who's going to break into Casey's and eat all the foot-long hot dogs? Well, it was, at S, and it was my friend Susan came up, and so it's an opportunity for us to communicate, even though we can't necessarily see each other. And then, of course, you've got things like Zoom, like YouTube, where you can kind of sort of interact with people, and still keeping that somewhat keeping that personal relationship up, because we have to fight loneliness. We have to join in activities with other people, share pictures of where we've been. We have to act pleasant, which sometimes is so hard, because when we're alone, we're like, oh, you got to be kidding me. But if we want to fight that loneliness, we have to be positive, because nobody wants to talk to somebody that's grumpy. And the last thing is, if we're lonely, we need to get help. Now, get help doesn't necessarily mean call your therapist and go, I'm lonely, I need help. It's, sometimes it's, texting a friend, saying, hey, how you doing? This quarantine's getting kind of rough. What are you guys doing? What are you having for dinner? Or what's going on with your kids? Text some friends that you haven't talked to in a while. But all of, the health and wellness of the individual contributes to the health and wellness of society. Because if individuals were well, then as a group we're well. If individuals were not well, then as a group we're not going to be well. So, which is why I said about the other thing is the healing rifts between different ethnic groups or different any type of group is on the individual level, because society in and of itself, I truly believe, is only as strong as its weakest link, just like any chain. You can have the most amazing chain in the world, but if you've got one chain, one link in the middle of that chain that's rusty and the weakest, that's as strong as your chain's going to be. So I think our society is only as strong as the individuals within it. All right. So again, real quick, dirty, chapter 13, social psychology. You guys are going to have the full PowerPoint along with what's here, plus the 3 experiments that I promised. Homework is already posted. The full PowerPoint slides are already posted. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you know where to find me. The discussion board is open if you want to use the discussion board. Otherwise, you guys stay safe, stay well, and I will see you next time. All right, you guys take care.